can hear. All right. It looks like we're live. So, Biscuit, thanks for coming on. Appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yeah, man. Like, I appreciate you having me on because I'm basically just an autodidact. And I know that you had people on, I think like Dr. Rasmussen, you had a conversation with him. You got some pretty heavy hitters that you dialogue with. So I appreciate you just allowing somebody who's just a clubhouse philosopher. Shout out to my clubhouse people like, Hades Zinn and John Lee, a lot of those guys. And we were excited to have you jump in too. You went into the clubhouse and hung out a couple of times. So we just kind of bicker back and forth, the theist group and the atheist group, and we're all friends at the end of the day. Hopefully, some of us, most of us.
Excluding Darth Dawkins.
Yeah, excluding Darth Dawkins. I think neither side is a fan of Darth.
Awesome. So
even though Darth does have his minions,
Oh yes, I don't think they count as friends. I think they just sold their soul to the devil, and they have to pay punishment by service to Darth Dawkins.
Yeah, anyone who's helping you on your track to maintaining your ignorance is not a true friend.
Yeah. So anyway, you were telling me you have a new argument for the existence of God.
I hope so, right? And it all started from watching this Joe Rogan podcast where,
as all good things do,
all good things start on Joe Rogan. And so who was it? It was Brett Weinstein. So Brett Weinstein was on there with Jordan Peterson, and they were having this dialogue. And Brett said something, and Brett is an atheist, even though on Twitter he says that he wants to separate from that title because of how mean-spirited the new atheists are. He kind of wanted to separate them, but he still is an atheist fundamentally. But he said religious people are evolutionarily fitter than non-religious people, not because God exists, but because religion is an adaptive form of evolution. And that got me thinking. I was like, wow. So, I started kind of looking at what other evolutionary biologists thought of that. And a lot of people agree that it's like, oh yeah, religion evolved and it kind of helped us to get where we are, these ideas, regardless of whether they correspond to reality or not.
Sure.
And so, one question I would have for you in starting the argument is, do you believe that our belief in God, or I think 90% or so of the world that believes in God, do you believe that that's a product of evolution?
Yes.
Okay, so my follow-up question, because I agree with you, my follow-up question would be, what isn't? What do we believe in that's not a product of that process?
Nothing.
I agree with you there too. So it's like, so here comes the problem, right? I think that it's possible to attack on the basis of your answers to those questions, which I agree with. It becomes possible to attack the correspondence theory of truth, right? We assume that, and a lot of atheists that I talk to, they just take for granted that true things are things that correspond to reality. But we weren't evolved to believe in things which correspond to reality. We were evolved to believe in things which will cause us to be fruitful and multiply, as it were, right?
Yep.
And those things can be lies. Like there's this scientific data on distance perception, where they took a control group and they gave them energy drinks, and then they took another group and didn't give them energy drinks, and they asked both groups to gauge the distance of an object. And the people who drank the energy drink assumed that the object was closer than the people who didn't drink the energy drink, which led them to conclude that our perception of distance depends on how much calories we have to spare, how much energy that we have to spare, right? And I mean, the same thing with colors, right? We have a vanishingly small photoreceptors to take in light in different colors. There are plant species with more photoreceptors than we have. And so everywhere we look, as far as objects being three-dimensional, objects being certain colors and shapes and sizes, all of these things are essentially icons on this interface that the evolutionary process has built for us.
Fun fact, there are some women who've evolved a fourth photoreceptor. So in women, they have 4 instead of 3.
You gotta be kidding me. Are you serious?
Yep. True facts.
That is crazy. And so we're not even seeing, we as men aren't even seeing
it's a very small number of women, but yes.
Right. And the thing is, even if we were to agree that if you were to say, hey, do you see that red apple over there? And I said, yeah, I see that red apple. You have to kind of believe by faith that what you mean when you say the word red is the thing that pops into my head. Right? We don't, and that's kind of a problem with the analogical use of language as an epistemological premise. Like, how do you know that the words you're saying to describe an object are the same concepts that pop into my head, right? And so evolution hasn't given us access to the real world. It's just given us these functional icons by which we get better at, reproducing, feeding, fighting, fleeing, and ultimately multiplying ourselves. And so if this God idea is functional toward the end of multiplying ourselves and propagating the species, how is the existence of God not as real as the existence of the apple you're holding in your hand? If we know enough science to doubt the correspondence theory of truth, then we're left essentially with the pragmatic and the coherent. Why not?
Notes. So I think there were 2 arguments there. One essentially went like, evolution selects for survivability, not truth. All of our beliefs are selected from evolution. Therefore, it is they're not reliable beliefs that they correspond to reality, something like that.
See, and the thing is, I would even say, I would doubt survivability. I don't think that evolution cares about survival. It just cares that you survive long enough to have children. And the argument is made with like X-rays and microwaves and ultraviolet rays that will and do kill us, but they tend not to kill us until we've had children, right? They kill us kind of later. And so we haven't evolved mechanisms for detecting them.
Right.
Because we still get offspring.
By survivability, I mean the species, your species, not you individually.
Right. Yeah.
So that one isn't quite original. That one is called The Evolutionary Argument Against Naturalism, written by Alvin Plantinga.
That's the evolutionary argument against. I thought his argument was that. No.
He has
that's
multiples.
Not the existence of God, though, right?
No, that's an argument against naturalism. So it's saying that all of our beliefs, if naturalism is true, all of our beliefs are a result of evolution. Evolution doesn't select for truth. Therefore, we don't have a justified reason to believe any of our beliefs are true. That was essentially the argument. So it's essentially the first half of what you said. But it's false. The argument is false because there are some beliefs that evolution can't falsify. So it's like evolution can't make me imagine a round square. Evolution can't make me believe I exist and be wrong at the same time. So evolution can't select for things that aren't possible in reality. Since evolution is a part of reality, that means that just like because all of our beliefs are a result of evolution, everything in an evolution is a result of reality. Therefore, evolution can't do anything that is contrary to reality. And so some of the beliefs will be true. So even though all of our beliefs are a result of evolution, that doesn't mean they're all false, because some of them must necessarily correspond to reality, like 1 + 1 = 2, A equals A, I think therefore I am, those kinds of things. And so if we build our epistemologies based off of those irrefutably correct beliefs, then the fact that all of our beliefs come from evolution doesn't invalidate our knowledge, our basis of knowledge. So the evolutionary argument against naturalism does not work. The second thing you said was, how is religion not as real as the apple in front of you? Well, I mean, in that sense, as a sense experience or a thought experience, yes, it is a thought experience. But when we're asking about reality, is something real? We're not asking, is it real in your imagination? We're asking, is it real independent of your imagination? So objectively real as opposed to subjectively real. Objective reality is that which is true independent of opinion, intuition, perspective. It would be there even if no humans were ever existed, kind of a thing. So is God real in that sense? Well, you couldn't say that based on the evolutionary argument. You could say God is a real idea in the human heads. I mean, I totally agree with that. But the question, is God real, is asking, is it real independent of human imagination? And just the fact that we imagine it does not give us reason to believe that. So your second part of your argument would not indicate that God was real objectively, but it would indicate that God is real subjectively.
I'm just writing that last part down. So when you started by talking about the law of non-contradiction, right? And in critique of Plantinga's argument, that there are certain things that just have to be true, right? Like something cannot be simultaneously A and non-A.
Sort of, yeah, that's an example.
So you have an opportunity to school me here, because I'm recently I've taken a position on the premises of epistemology that these are what we need in order to do philosophy. We need to assume the epistemological premises in order to learn, like the law of non-contradiction, cause and effect, basic reliability of our senses, and so on. And a lot of people have different premises, but just because I have to assume the law of non-contradiction in order to learn does not necessarily mean that this is what reality is like. I know that sounds crazy, because I can't think of anything that I can't imagine a square circle either. I can't imagine something being both apple and non-apple. But I think the assumption behind the premises of epistemology is the study of the nature of knowledge. It's what we need to assume in order to learn things. It doesn't mean that the universe actually obeys those laws in reality. It just means we can't conceive of it being otherwise.
Sure, but that would be a separate argument. So the argument here is that, like, you're right when you say that all of our ideas are a result of evolution, because obviously all of our ideas came from evolution. Likewise, all of evolution came from reality. So all of the things in reality must also be a result, or all of the things in evolution must be a result of reality, just like all of our ideas must be a result of evolution. So even if you disagree with what the constraints are, like you could take a non-standard logic approach and say that those are the real logics or whatever way in which evolution forces us to be, some of those are going to necessarily be true because they're going to be constrained by reality. Which particular ones you think are there doesn't make that much of a difference. But right. Like, it doesn't matter which form of logic you take. It can never be the case that I think I exist and I'm wrong. That could never be the case. In any of the logics, they're all going to grant that one, except for maybe diletheism.
See, now you said that God is a concept in human minds, but what you were wondering is God real, independent of human minds? And my question would be, what is?
Particles, stars.
So particles exist TVs. Regardless of human minds. Yes. How can you justify that assumption?
Novel testable predictions, which confirm their existence.
But those testable predictions depend on minds.
Yes, but the hypothesis is that so we start with I think therefore I am, so I'm existing, and then we want to say we need some way to differentiate my imagination from reality. Like, I imagine a unicorn, I don't see a unicorn. There's obviously some difference between these two things, and the way we do that is future prediction. So if you have some model that says I can predict the future because I think it works like this, and that works, then it is reasonable to believe that model corresponds to reality. So if you can say that I believe that when I do this experiment, we're going to get these results or whatever, because I believe there are particles actually there, and you get those results, that is good evidence that your hypothesis is true. Obviously, it's coming in through your subjective personal experience, but your personal experience is very bad at predicting the future. Like, your imagination is very bad at predicting the future. But if you come up with a model that's very good at predicting the future, then it's reasonable to believe that is in more correspondence to reality than purely your imagination, which means it has to be something outside of your imagination.
No, I think that makes sense. I'm sympathetic these days to what's called the interface theory of perception, or ITP. Have you heard of this?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, it's a popular book called Evidence, or the Case Against Reality. And he talks about, okay, we have this interface with these icons, and that's what evolution built for us. And if I were to take a magnifying glass and look at my laptop really closely, I'm not going to see the reality. I'm going to see pixels, right? And so according to ITP, or the interface theory, that's what science is showing us. It's showing us the pixels, but it's not showing us the ones and zeros. It's not showing us what's really behind the interface. So science can't show you what's on the other side of reality. It can just show you how to function within the interface, how to use the interface.
Well, I'd say that's partially correct. I'd say that science gives us a access to reality to some degree of certainty. So it's like when we look at a TV or something, we are seeing the TV, but we're not seeing it if we had eagle eyes or something, or if we had a magnifying glass, we would see more of the TV, or more precision of the TV. So science gives us a level of accuracy that does describe reality. So I'm a scientific realist. I believe it does describe reality, but it's just not as high def as it could be. So it's going to get more high definition in the future. So I think that I'm not an instrumentalist in that. I think that all of science is just a useful fiction. So I do believe science actually describes reality. It's just not in a high def enough perspective yet. It's going to get more high def in the future.
Yeah, I think I get what you're saying. Like, and the question is, I think, wondering what's actually there. We were talking about an apple earlier. And I think when you tell me that you ate a delicious red apple,
I would never do that.
No, I don't like red apples either. So you wouldn't eat a delicious red apple, but you could eat a red apple.
Maybe a red Coke, red cherry Coke, red pizza.
Cherry Coke, not Pepsi though. So if you drank a delicious cherry Coke, or just for simplicity, the disgusting red apple, you eat a disgusting red apple. We're being pragmatic for the most part, I think. We're not talking about correspondence there. When you say red, and I say, yeah, I agree, red, I'm not thinking in my head that I'm seeing the exact same color you are. And in fact, I'm probably not, right?
I disagree with that. So I would say that because we are definitely products of evolution, evolution works in the same way generally. That's why we have two arms. Both of us have a lot of similarities. 10 fingers, 10 toes, 2 eyes. It's most likely that we are seeing the exact same color red because evolution produced both of us in probably an almost identical way.
But evolution is not an exact process by any means. I mean, that explains the mutations, right?
Right. So there are definitely some differences, like the women who have 4 cones, you can see the extra color. But I would say that the vast majority of us, because mutations are rare, they're not really common. So it's very likely that the vast majority of humans all see the exact same thing, just like we all have the eyes. And so there's probably going to be some difference, like the women who have 4 cones or whatever, and people who are colorblind. But the vast majority of people probably see the same color red, just like they have the same 2 eyes and same 2 legs.
Well, here's the thing. If you and I are in the same room and have an apple on a table, just the fact that there's one light source hitting my iris from a different angle than you're standing in means I necessarily see a different red. And it's not a different shade of red that I could describe to you, but I think just because you're not me, just by the sheer fact that you're not standing exactly where I'm standing in a room with a single light source, you are going to see a different red than me. It's going to continue because you're going to be seeing different parts of the shadow than I am. So the way that light plays, right? It's like we can't possibly look at the same object and say that is the same color. That's the exact same thing, unless we're standing in the exact same place, because we need light to behave in the exact same way in order to give us the same feature.
I don't think so. So I think that because evolution works in such a similar way across people groups, that if we're looking at the apple, they're going to be pretty much the same shade. Like obviously they're going to be slightly different colors because of the way light reflects off of it, but there's not going to be a significant enough difference to call it not the same red. We can still call it the same red.
Yeah, no. Now there I agree with you, right? And that's the reason I use the term pragmatism, is because it's like it works, right? It's there's no functional difference, even though we would agree, like, yeah, okay, I'm not seeing the exact same thing as you do. But even when you run into the analogical use of language problem, when you say red, you don't know that I'm not seeing what you would see if I were to say green.
Right, you don't know with certainty, but you can have pretty high levels of high level of reliability that you are.
Where would that reliability stem from?
Evolution, induction, science, all of the different synesthesia tests.
But science can't get a grasp on what my experience is. That's one of the hardest problems in science right now. I mean, whenever they do these, 125 toughest questions for the scientific community in Science Daily, it's always what is the universe made of and the biological origin of consciousness. These are difficult questions. So, I mean, the scientific community wouldn't be able to tell me what shade of red I see.
Well, we could actually tell you the difference between the colors you're seeing. So, like, have you seen the synesthesia tests?
No.
So, synesthesia tests, what they do is they have colors with little balls, little bubbles, circle thingies, and they're different colors. And if there's a sufficient enough difference in the colors, you can make out a number. It's going to be like there's going to be a 2 in green and the rest of them are going to be red. But if you're red, green, colorblind, you're just going to see they're all going to look the exact same color. You can't tell the difference.
Oh, wow.
So, and there's lots of these for each different variation of the eye's cone. So you can tell there's all the different kinds of color blindness that you have, and they do tests for all of these, and they do it for eye tests for eye doctors all the time. So we can tell the difference in the disparity between the colors and whether or not you can distinguish them, whether or not that you would label as red is the same as somebody else. We can say that you have the same disparity between the two colors or not as somebody else. Whether or not you would label them, whatever you would label them, is more of the problem of identity and how do you label things, which is not really the issue here. What we want is, can we say with some level of certainty that two people are seeing probably the same color spectrum? And the answer is, well, yeah, because we have the same cone structure, and when we do these tests, we have similar results for different people, and we can tell when they do have these results, we can fix them with certain things. Like if they're red, green, colorblind, and we give them glasses that are a certain kind to fix that, we can fix the problems. And so we do have a pretty good reliability of to how these relationships work and what the people are seeing. Even though we don't have certainty, it's always possible that they're seeing green when you see red. It is highly reliable. Yeah, they're seeing the same color you are.
Right, and that would be one of my critiques of the correspondence theory of reality, is that it plays on the desire for certainty so much, at least in the circles that I run in. So what? I mean, have you ever heard of like the concept of the paralysis of reality? That if we were to see what really was, we would be paralyzed by it, and that's the reason that evolution has given us these icons or these concepts. So, and in a similar way, I'll go back to the laptop. If in order to send an email, I had to get all the ones and zeros and really see what the programs really are, it would take me a week to send the email, right? So, the creator of my laptop gave me icons to function more easily so that I can get things done. And in a similar way, we understand that when objects are hot, their electrons are moving faster within the object, right? Super fast. And when an object is cool, the electrons are moving at a slower pace. If I had to perceive that reality in order to gauge what things I should touch and what things I should not touch, I would be paralyzed. I wouldn't know, that's too much information to process. And so what evolution has done is given me these easier icons, easier things to understand. But the question is, what's actually there on the other side? When we talk about an apple, we can agree, I think, on a pragmatic level of what an apple is, its shape, its size, what it tastes like. But the question is, what is there on the other side? Because evolution has been telling us something about apples throughout this journey, right? That there's something about them which increases our likelihood of reaching an age where we will give off offspring. And so the question might be the same if I were to ask, what is the evolutionary process trying to explain about this God concept? Because there are other things which have paralyzed our ancestors. The concept of death, for instance, right? That you're going to die, that there might not be anything on the other side. The questions of origin and meaning and morality and destiny, right? And there's something about the God idea that as an icon, we kind of see it, functioning in societies. But what's on the other side of that? What is on the other side of what evolution has left us? as far as the God idea goes, because it's been beneficial, it's been adaptive.
So what was the question there? Like, obviously we can't have certainty that other people are experiencing, but we can have it with a high level of probability. And you mentioned that the correspondence theory is obsessed with certainty, because that is not my experience. My experience, the consensus in philosophy and science is fallibilism. Fallibilism is the position you don't need certainty for knowledge. And that's like a huge consensus in both philosophy and science, that you don't need certainty. That's one of the major positions that most
So
people
why
agree
am I
on.
asked so often to prove things? It's like people say, "Oh, you said this, prove it." And I have to always constantly remind people that we shouldn't be looking for proof. Proof is very rarely forthcoming. What we should be asking each other for is evidence, for which there, seems to be, in my opinion, an abundance for the existence of God. But
Yeah, it's a colloquial debate tactic. It's kind of like a precept, like Darth Dawkins. Like, they're asking for absolute certainty. They're saying, how do you provide
yeah,
certainty for God? And it's an easy way to win a debate, because if your opponent can't provide certainty, then you said, you can't provide certainty, so I win. When obviously that's not how anything in reality works. Not how science
right.
never proves anything. So if you're in a serious debate conversations, it's more about, does this increase the probability the proposition is true, or does it not? And that's really what is more interesting. It doesn't really matter if you get 100% or 90 or 80 or 70. It just, does this raise it above 51%? Is this evidence or is it not evidence? And how much evidence is it, is the real interesting debate.
What is your biggest because I think you would agree that um the existence of God and religion has had a pragmatic function through human history. And of course it's had its evils. There's been, terrible, unjustifiable things done by religious groups. But would you have more problems with a pragmatic theory of truth than you would a correspondence theory?
More problems. I'm not sure what you mean by more problems. Like, they would both functionally work the same. It's just the
Like,
difference would be,
the problem with correspondence is like, what is it, the problem with correspondence is nobody knows what's real. We weren't even evolved to see the real. And so when you say, oh, truth corresponds to, is whatever corresponds to reality, it's like, well, what do you mean by reality? It's like, you sound like Morpheus. How do you define real? You know? And so it just seems like that, especially when you're talking about the existence of God, something we can't even take to a lab, God is not an object within space time. So it's like, we don't get anywhere if we're talking about correspondence. So
uh, I'm not sure that's really would be an issue, because correspondence would be like, if you believe object X exists, does object X exist independent of your mind? Like, by God, they usually mean a non-physical mind that created everything else. And so
yeah,
if correspondence would still work in that case, like, does this thing exist? Yes or no? So I don't see that as much of a problem, because when you're talking about the evolutionary idea of a God, where it's a product of the mind, most theists who believe in a God would say, well, that's not God existing. That's just an idea in the head. That would be a non-existing God, or a subjective imaginary God, like a unicorn. I wouldn't say a unicorn exists just because you can imagine it. So it seems like when theists are talking about God, they mean, does this mind, this non-physical mind who created the universe, actually exist independent of our imagination? And then when you're talking about reality and how do you define reality, that would be like, I'm not sure if that's the same, because it would be like, whatever you think the fundamental nature of reality is, whether it's like this being thing is what they think is the fundamental nature of reality, or quantum fields or whatever, there are different ways to answer that question. And
but wouldn't that be pragmatism though? If we agreed at the beginning of this conversation, all right, we're going to play with this myth. We're going to begin with this myth in mind, and we're going to talk about reality from the standpoint of this or that myth. We're being pragmatic at that point, uh, and I think we're doing that for the most part when we have dialogues about shared experiences.
sure, I mean, and obviously I think that the way we define things is clearly going to be pragmatic. We can't define things as they are, because everything comes through us in a pragmatic lens of how we imagine stuff. But it's still possible for the way we define things to correspond to reality, even though it may or may not be the case. We can still say that, yes, the sun is real and the earth is real and the earth goes around the sun, and these are real things in reality. It's not just an instrumental thing. Like, there's no instrumental value on, like, knowing the distance to the moon is 255,000 miles. That doesn't benefit us in evolution in one way or the other. But what did benefit us in evolution is the ability to measure stuff. And so it's highly unlikely that evolution would produce a complete fiction of everything in the universe, or a way to model everything in the universe that's in a completely fictional way, just based off of what was pragmatic hundreds of thousands of years ago. So I find it unlikely that even if evolution was just creating models or instrumental models, that it would create instrumental models that would create a very detailed view of the world that is very precise in such a way that we can measure the speed of light and whatever. And all of that's just a fiction produced by evolution. It seems highly unlikely. Like, that would be more than what I would expect of evolution.
See, well, the thing is, I agree that the scientific process works really well. I just don't think that any scientist would conclude that what it's showing us is objective reality. It's just a closer look at what we experience, which gives us clues about, how to function. That's the reason science is so pragmatic in its outworking, is that it can give you something like an iPhone. It can create an airplane or a motorized vehicle, right? But it's not showing us what's actually there on the other side, no matter how close you look. Because no matter how close you look, you still are looking with your eyeballs, and you're still using your mind. That's kind of evolved for, these, processes.
Well, most scientists would say it does tell us what reality is like. There's scientific realists. So there's a poll, the Phil Survey's paper 2020. It showed that the vast majority of scientists and philosophers are realists. So they believe that, yes, science does tell us about reality itself. But it's just telling us, like, as I mentioned before, just not at a high enough level of detail. So no one's saying that this is the perfect precision, smallest level of detail of reality possible. It's just saying this is some level of detail. So, like, if
I wonder if what the scientific and philosophical community mean by that is that they're telling us what's real by canceling out what's clearly not. And I think I would agree if that's what they mean.
I don't
right?
think so. Could you say that again?
Like, when the scientific community lets us know that our photoreceptors, we have less photoreceptors than some plant species, lots of different animal species, they're not telling us who sees reality correctly, or who views colors correctly, but they are telling us something about reality and showing us that we don't view it correctly, because that is a question about reality, and it does answer a question. But I don't know that anything's been able to accurately get us to the other side.
Could you explain what you mean by canceling out what's not in a little more detail? Like, I don't understand that.
Yeah, I think you said rightly that science doesn't prove things, right? But science does disprove things. Namely, its own, like a scientific hypothesis can disprove another hypothesis. So, like, the inference to the best explanation given multiple competing hypotheses, there is a best explanation that cancels the majority of the hypotheses. So there'll be one hypothesis that explains the majority of the data in the simplest way, and that essentially does the work of disproving, what used to be assumed. Like, I think that they've disproved that the Earth was flat, which used to be an assumption. I don't know if it was popular worldwide, but it used to be an assumption that the Earth was flat, and the scientific community has disproven that.
Well, not exactly. So, like, we could all be in the Matrix and the world could actually be flat. It's just an illusion or whatever. So science can't disprove that. What it can do when it disproves a hypothesis, it says, if my hypothesis is true, that there is an external world and that the world is flat or whatever, then here's what we'd expect to see if I do this experiment. And if you do the experiment and you see something different, then because you've defined your hypothesis as being, if this is true, this is what we will see necessarily, and you don't see it, then your hypothesis must be false, because there must be something else you're missing. And so science can only disprove well-defined hypotheses, where the scientist literally says, if this is my hypothesis, this is what we will necessarily see. And if we don't see it, then my hypothesis is false. But if you just define a hypothesis vaguely enough, like science can't falsify it. It's unfalsifiable, because it could be like, well, we could be in the Matrix, and so maybe the world's flat or whatever. And so science, there's this problem in science called the problem of underdetermination. Have you heard of that one?
No.
So the problem of underdetermination is the fact that
Underdetermination.
Underdetermination. Underdetermination is the fact that every single piece of data, every empirical piece of data, can be explained by infinitely many hypotheses. Always. So, like, maybe the whole universe was created by a leprechaun, or a potato, or a magic unicorn, or 2 magic unicorns, or 3, or 4. You can make up infinitely many hypotheses to explain all of the data. And so there's no way that we could prove one is absolutely right and another is, all the others are wrong. All we can do is say that this hypothesis was able to give us the ability to predict the future first. And so it's the best. That's essentially, and then most scientists say, if we can do that, then that's reason to believe it's true. Like objectively describes reality. This is what we have a reason to believe is really, really there, kind of a thing. So it's called science.
But isn't there also kind of this lean towards simplicity at the same time, that if something can explain the same amount of data more simply, then that's a favored hypothesis, right?
Sort of, because simplicity is arbitrary. You can define it in many different ways. Like God people define it as ontological simplicity, where it's made of the least amount of stuff, least combination of stuff. Nobody in science uses that. That's a very stupid definition. Physicists use mathematical simplicity. As long as it's mathematically elegant, that's what is the preferred simplicity. So simplicity is more of a pragmatic thing, where it's like it's just better to use a simple way than a complex way.
Because that's what I use to, like, when you get into these philosophical discussions, somebody brings up Santa Claus, right? It's like, well, there is evidence for Santa Claus, obviously. But there are more simple explanations that explain the data, right? That you get presents under the tree on Christmas Eve, and those presents, what you got, seem to correspond to what you asked the guy for when you sat on his lap in the mall, right? So that would be evidence in favor of Santa Claus. The question would be, is there an explanation that has a more simple hypothesis than somebody who flies around the world and does all of these things, right? So I think that's where simplicity comes in handy.
Well, sort of. So there's cases where simplicity is not preferred. So, for example, maybe what's causing lightning? Was it one guy, Zeus, who's just hanging out there using his hammer to, or just throwing the lightning bolts or whatever? Or is it trillions and trillions of particles that are rubbing together and creating friction and then creating a electromagnetic field that then generates a big zappy thingy? Well, if you're going to argue for simplicity, I mean, the Thor thingy seems a lot more simple to people like 3,000 years ago. But
good point.
When we discovered it, we're like, nope, it's not. The simplest solution doesn't necessarily work there. It's only simple once you understand the relationship of the physics and the fundamental laws. Then it seems simple because the math is simple. But when you look at it from a perspective of a human person, the simplicity of trillions of particles rubbing together is significantly worse than one Zeus guy, which is many people might think they think God is a simple explanation. So simplicity is kind of an arbitrary term that is self-referring to whatever the field uses as the most successful methodology. So if the most successful methodology in the field produces the results, that's essentially what simple means in the field. It's not like there's some objective definition of simplicity.
Yeah. Well, I didn't want to piss off your audience too much more, because they're probably thinking, okay, where does God come into play here? And my question to you would be, if you agree that the belief in God has been an adaptive form of evolution, and I think you do, right?
Sure.
Okay, so if the belief in God has been an adaptive form of evolution, what do you think that translates to on the other side? Because
other side?
I'm sorry?
Other side of what?
Other side of our enclosed subjective perception on what reality is, right? So I use other side as like in here and out there, subjective versus objective, right? So in a bunch of people's subjective perspective, they had this God idea, this, whether it's a triomni God or just this idea of God on a subjective level, and it had extreme, evolutionary benefits. There's this tribalism, there's this oneness, this unity of purpose. I mean, and it even translates to today's societies where, in Christian nations, right, you just have, and this kind of sucks. I don't think that this is necessarily fair, but you have a lot more opportunities. You have, an easier time finding a mate, finding a wife. My wife happens to not be Christian, so that's uh, even though that worked in my favor. She's a great woman. But
ouch, Christian women just smack, just like, oh God.
Right? What do you think that is, though, on the other side? Like, what is evolution trying to tell us about this God idea? And the fact that it's so helpful, the fact that it's been so beneficial, because it seems to me that on atheism, that's all that's left is, you want to survive, you want to have a good life, because life is short and you're not going to get another one. So why not? What is the value of truth under atheism?
Well, there's a few things there. One is that atheism doesn't say there isn't an afterlife. There could always be an afterlife we just haven't discovered yet. That's definitely possible, but there's no God. But I'd say that the reason we evolved the idea of a God would be because it's very anthropocentric. It's human based. So it's like we have this thing of the type 1 and type 2 fallacies where if you hear a rustling in the bushes and you think it's a lion, you run away every time and you survive because you ran away. But if you were full skeptic, science mind, you'd be like, no, I'm going to wait for more evidence because it could just be the wind and it may not be a lion, so let's just wait for more evidence. Well, that guy gets eaten more often. The two groups, right. The one who runs away survives more, the one who gets eaten doesn't survive and reproduce. And so evolution would select for the one that survives more often, which is the one who says, oh, it's always a lion, so always run away. And because of that, it's more likely that evolution is going to give us this kind of hyperactive agency detection system where anytime we see a creak in the floor or a door shake or whatever, it's going to be like, oh, there's a monster under the bed or somebody's hiding in the closet. And so it gives us this idea that there are minds behind things as a safety mechanism. That's the message evolution is sending us, is that if there's some unknown, if we think it's a danger and treat it as a danger, then we're more likely to survive. And that's the message evolution is sending us by this God hypothesis. There's an unknown, death, what's after death, we don't know what it is, so we treat it as a danger, and that's essentially what evolution is doing. It's just making us treat every single unknown as if it is some kind of agency danger thingy, and that's what keeps humanity safe. That would be the message that evolution is giving us by giving us the idea of a God.
And there's a gigantic tribe that still believes this, right? You use the term hyperactive agency detection, that we want to kind of detect agency everywhere, even in places where agency is absent.
Right. I said this is more than just religion. Like, you and me probably feel the same thing when we watch a scary movie and leave all the lights off and you hear a creak, like, oh my God, the alien is in the next room. That's the exact same feeling that we have. That's the exact same feeling that religious people have when they're feeling God. It's just the opposite of alien. It's more like a friendly kind of a thing rather than an alien kind of a thing. So the sensation is the same for everybody. Everybody pretty much has this hyperactive agency detection system. The difference is what they apply it. Some apply it to God, some apply it to spirits and ghosts, some apply it to aliens, the UFO people. Like, it's the exact same sensation, just applied to a different conclusion of what they think is causing it. So all humans have this.
Right, but doesn't it become logical to believe in God by dint of that system itself, because of how pragmatic the conclusion, because of its instrumental value? Because we're not sure of its correspondence value. I think any honest person has to say that they're essentially agnostic about it. Like, I'm a theist. I believe that God exists, but when I look at what the scientific data is kind of putting out, not about the existence of God, but about the benefits of believing in God, it's like, evolution is trying to tell us something. And I think I mean, you might have hit on it with the hyperactive agency detection, that, this is actually false and that everyone's just believing in this false thing. But what value does the truth have if it's the opposite of what causes us to progress?
What value does the truth have?
I think somebody asked you, I think it might have been Rasmussen, where he said there's either a positive or negative amount of elementary particles in the universe, right? And you have a 50-50 chance of being right. But what is the value of either truth claim? Why would you fight for one? Even if you were somehow, sure about the answer, if you just felt really confident that it's even, right? Why would you fight for that? Why would you struggle to maintain it when there's no value in that truth?
Well, I'd say it does have value. I'd say value is given internally. So just like people see value in a God and value in an afterlife, atheists see value in truth, value in debating, value in communicating. Like, I think the value in God thing is no different than what atheists find value in. So I don't really understand. Are you asking from a subjective perspective of the individual? Because from that, they're the same.
No,
Atheists.
I'm saying, when I look at the data, right? Are you a determinist?
Yes.
Okay, atheists tend to be determinists. Not that determinists tend to be atheists, but I think the majority of philosophers are compatibilists. But they
Compatibilism is just a different kind of determinism. It's just determinism's in denial. Determinists in denial.
You need to have Dennett on your show.
Yep.
To make a defense, but I think I'm sympathetic to compatibilism, but they did research on determinism. They had people read a couple of paragraphs from Francis Crick. Francis Crick, he elucidated the structure of the DNA molecule, but then after that, he really fought hard for determinism, the idea that we don't have free will. And they took a control group and had them read this article by Francis Crick saying we don't have determinism. And the people who were convinced of determinism reported that they were less likely to give to charity and more likely to cheat on math tests, right? And I think that that's a sad understanding of the implications of determinism, because you don't have to be an awful person to be a determinist. But I do think it's like fighting for determinism when it has very little pragmatic value, right? Even though we don't know, we're not close to discovering that we are determined. I think that there's still a debate there between, determinism and free will. I happen to think that there's a debate there.
I don't, but
say again?
I do not. I think free will has been sufficiently debunked. But to answer your question, I think that it seems more like that you're comparing in general religion versus determinism here, but I think it's individual examples of certain kinds of determinism can cause people to be fatalistic and do the example things you listed. And certain religions do the same thing. Like Calvinism is a determinist religion. They believe that God determined absolutely everything and you have no control over it. So there are certain secular deterministic ideologies that can produce the same kind of positive psychological outcomes of not cheating on tests without a God, but some of them don't.
Like salvifically deterministic, right? They think that you can't choose God, that God has to choose you.
Oh, there are some Calvinists who think literally everything was chosen by God. Every action you make, every decision, literally everything. But so I think that there are examples of determinism who can make you fatalistic and examples of religion who can make you fatalistic and examples of both that can also make you more holistic and hopeful for the future. So I don't think it's specifically about God versus determinism or God versus atheism. I think it's about the connotations with the ideology that you have when you're thinking about it. So like, you're also less likely to steal if after watching a Disney movie or something, or you're watching one of those movies where there's the Rudy from football movie where you'd cry because the the underdog succeeds. If you're watching any of those kinds of uplifting movies, you're also less likely to cheat and steal, and you're also more likely to give to charity. If you watch something depressing or miserable where the bad guy wins, you're less likely to give to charity, and you're more likely to cheat.
Right. Those aren't things that you take away with you, right? So determinism is a philosophy that you take home with you. Whereas if I go to the movies and watch something, that's going to shed off of me in a couple of days. I'm not gonna instill that as a philosophy.
Well, it's the same. The same thing is
the same thing with atheism. You take it with
the it's not true exactly. So, in the papers you referenced of the one where they like had them read the Bible and then see if they give to a charity and cheat and more, those kinds of papers, those are all short-term effects. It's only for the first few hours after they read the Bible, and then after that they go back to the standard. So these effects that they're seeing in these results are also the same kind as the movies. It's just a temporary effect of the certain mental state the person is in. It's not a permanent effect.
People who go to church on a regular basis give almost triple in charitable giving than do people who don't go to church. And I mean, these are all, scientific papers. And so,
yep. But their societies also have less people who are healthy, and they have lower life expectancy and more people in poverty. So yes, religious people do give more to charity, but in the secular nations, there's more universal healthcare systems and there's better health overall. So there are obviously different kinds of actions prescribed by different ideologies, but I think that the ones that are, if we're comparing the effects of the ideology, the secular ones win because they produce the best societies, the most educated, the most healthy, the longest life expectancy.
And by secular society, you don't mean that the majority of the people within the society are non-religious.
That's what I mean, yes.
The majority, so what is a society in which the majority of the population is non-religious?
Well, the UK just went over 50% non-religious recently. A lot of the European states, Japan, the bad examples like China, Russia, North Korea, those are the worst examples. But if we take the overall average of countries who are majority non-religious people, the average of them is significantly higher than every other country or every other demographic combination of religious countries in the world. So I don't remember which of the European countries, but it's the general, like Australia, Denmark, Sweden, Germany, Netherlands, blah blah blah. Some of them, I know Iceland is majority Christian, but it's just those. All of those are majority. Most of those are majority non-religious.
Yeah, I was just looking for that. That strikes me as remarkable that there's that much, because I assume that the statistic is still true that 7% of the world is atheist, right? 7 to 8% of the world.
Probably, but that's not including the non-religious agnostics and the other secular groups who don't identify with the word atheist. So there's a larger group of people who don't believe in a God.
Well, so we're waiting on the word to kind of align itself with what atheism means today, which is the lack of belief as opposed to saying that there is no God.
Yeah. So the non-religious group is significantly bigger than the atheist group. And so there's a larger number of people who don't believe in a God than who identify with the word atheist.
For sure. So yeah, I think you've kind of got the crux of this idea that I'm trying to put forward, that if the belief in God has been and still is evolutionarily adaptive, which is to the end of being fruitful and multiplying, then it's very difficult to distinguish the importance of the belief in God from the importance of anything else that evolution has given us that's brought us this far.
I don't like, I think I understand your argument, but that same argument would apply to literally every belief we have. So, and we can definitively we can definitively prove many of our beliefs are false, like optical illusions. We can prove for a fact that optical illusion is not occurring. Literally, the Rubik. Have you seen the Rubik's Cube where there's the two different sides? Like one is a really dark orange on the top and one is a really light orange in the middle, and then when you copy and paste, they're the exact same color.
Yeah, right.
So we can prove that optical illusion is completely false, but we know it's a product of evolution. It has been extremely beneficial to survival. And so if we're going based off of your argument, then it would also be reasonable to believe that those two orange dots are different colors. And so if your justification is that if...
See, but
go ahead.
I guess I'm just opposed to truths that don't do anything, right? So it's like if we're taking truth to mean fact, we're not going to go anywhere. It's like to say God isn't true, the existence of God is not true because it doesn't correspond to a fact in reality, a reality that we freely admit we cannot get to by scientific means or any others. But I think you reject that. I think you reject that we can't approach it, at least with science, and I respect that. But if we're saying that truths have to be factual, then we're missing so much of the truth that's hidden within it. Like I wouldn't compare religion to Harry Potter, but it's like if my wife loves Harry Potter. So if I'm sitting down watching it with her, and I don't like those movies.
What?
But if I'm sitting down, she would hate that I'm espousing Harry Potter. But it's like if I sit down and watch Harry Potter with her, I can pull the wisdom out of that movie. There's lots of truth there, even though it's set against a false narrative. But if I focus on the fact that there is no Harry Potter, there is no Sorcerer's Stone, there is no game called Quidditch, nobody rides on broomsticks. If I focus on those things, I am missing all of the value, right, that I could be digesting from that movie. And I think that we make that mistake when we say, okay, for God to exist, God has to correspond in some way to the real, even though I admit that I'm not even involved to have an accurate perception on the real, right? We're missing the gold, I think.
Well, if what you mean is that you're not taking advantage of the social benefits that religion provides, sure, but right, I'd say...
But that's all that matters.
I think there's a more important issue there. I think that's
all that matters, the social benefit.
Well, I think that there's other ways to get the social benefits. It's like, even if there's a watering hole over there and you don't take advantage of that watering hole, there's other watering holes. You just go to a different watering hole. And so if you can get the same benefit from a different means, then there's no reason to blindly trust in that one first means.
Yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying. I mean, the thing is, atheists, they tend to have, groups that but it's like, it's such a rough kind of, I have a buddy that I'm not going to say his name here, but on Clubhouse, he and I were having a discussion, and he talked about how Santa Claus, his parents told him that Santa existed, and he believed in it for a long time. And when he finally learned that Santa didn't exist, when they finally told him Santa didn't exist, he had a really, really bad reaction to it. Like, he was really, I see you starting to laugh, bro. Don't laugh. This is not funny. He said he had a harsh reaction to it. And I was sympathetic. I never thought Santa Claus was a real thing, because it was just never presented to me that way. I thought it was like this fun thing that people did around Christmas. It never struck me as real. But to him, it struck him as real. And it really was a big letdown when he was told Santa wasn't real. And that's what made him a skeptic. And so he continued to, doubt and be skeptical of, and he, is ultimately skeptical of God as an atheist today. But the life that leaves you with, sometimes people being ostracized from their family, being nervous around religious communities, and not really partaking of the value that's there. Even if I were an atheist, I would imagine that I wouldn't want my daughter or son to be one, just because of the problems that are associated with it from a social standpoint. And that would be the entirety of my interest as someone who believes in evolution, and in that, this process is, you're going to be a lot happier if you have a tribe within society.
Sure, but I mean, obviously, the atheism movement is a relatively new movement in human society, whereas religion is many thousands of years old. And so I think that as the atheist movement grows, we're seeing an increase in the community. Like we have the Sunday Assembly in the UK and the Unitarian something something church here. There are definitely atheist communities that are growing and becoming that bastion of social connection that religion is. Obviously, religion has an advantage because it's been around longer. But I don't think that that's an inherent truth of religion. I think that that's just a product of the fact that it's been around longer and has had a lot longer to develop a social group than atheism. And I think atheism in time will develop that, and so we'll have the same social benefits of religion. So, like many of the studies you listed show that that's only true in America, where atheists in America have a lower happiness index standard because they don't have as much of a community. They're in a very religious country, and a lot of religious impacts go into the law, which is degrading to atheists. And so I think that once atheism grows and continues to grow at the same rate it has been, then it will have the exact same positive impacts as the other religious groups. And so doesn't really make any sense to simply adopt a different religious practice because it was already successful in the past, when, like, say going across an ocean. Like, you can go across an ocean on a ship, takes several months or whatever, but the guys who invented the airplane, you're like, you know what, we can do this in like several hours, we just need a new thing to do it. Their first planes were crap. They couldn't do anything, couldn't cross the ocean at all. Does that mean you should abandon the devotion to trying to develop a plane and just stick with boats because boats work? Well, no, because there could be something better. And so I think the atheist movement is kind of trying to move towards that, of something better than religion, where we can still gain those kinds of social cohesion values, but do it without the mythicism and the negative connotation beliefs that come along with religion.
The negative things that come along with religion.
Yes.
You know, I'm sympathetic to the idea that atheism might grow. I don't know that it will ever approach more than 15% of the world's people. And the reason I am doubtful is because it's not saying anything. It's really just saying that I deny the existence of something. And most human beings deny the existence of more than we accept the existence of. We all have limited perspectives. So the things we don't believe in are vastly outnumbered the things that we do. And so saying I deny the existence of God is not really interesting on its face. I think it gleans interest because the existence of God is so taken for granted by the rest of us. It's like, really? That's amazing. How did you accomplish that? You know? And so, because I mean, on the one hand, the atheists that I talk to, they tend to think of themselves as scientifically literate and advocates of science. And you know, the classical atheist that I'm familiar with, like Friedrich Nietzsche, was an anti-realist, right? He wasn't on the side of science. So you can be an atheist and be anti-science. You can be, like you said, you can be an atheist and be spiritual and believe that an afterlife exists without the deity at the top, right? And so it's almost, I almost struggle calling it a movement because it's not toward anything. It's not about much.
Well, that's how all religions started. So all religions started with some ambiguous idea. It was never very specific. And I think I agree that current atheism, the current movement, is probably not going to be what transforms society, because you're right, it doesn't have any direction. I'm trying to start an atheist church. I'm trying to start a church that's based on my objective morality and say, if we have this goal of this objective morality, where the goal is to build a world where it's impossible to force anyone to do anything they don't consent to, and now we have this ideology to group behind, then that version of atheism, or those kinds of versions of atheism that have something to tie their community together, are the kinds that are more likely to grow and develop into something like a religion. And so I think that by doing that and offering a kind of an ideology based on objective morality, it will, when atheism becomes popular, it's going to become popular because there's going to be a better answer provided to the big questions. Like, one of the biggest movements that's converted most people away from Christianity was Darwin's theory of natural selection and the origin of species,
Right.
because it offered an answer to something. It obviously was still atheistic. He didn't believe in a God, but that did convert a large number of people to stop believing in a God because it offered an answer that previously God was thought to be the answer for. And so as we have a similar solution to morality, I think that we're going to have another big wave of converting people to atheists. And once we have a similar solution to the Big Bang, or once we discover aliens, there's going to be other big waves of people moving towards secular worldviews. So I think that you're right that just denying God isn't going to be the thing that converts most people or changes most people. It's going to be the fact that secular scientists are going to discover answers that are better than the ones provided in the religious texts, and that's going to really what's going to move people away from religion and more towards secular values, especially in the case of morality. I think that's a big one.
And you're not worried about the void that's going to be left from such a pragmatic idea. Like, during these waves of atheism where people leave their theism behind, Nietzsche, for instance, was very worried about that prospect. Even as someone who believed that God was dead, Nietzsche was very worried about the world that we're going to create as a result of that truth being realized.
Yeah, I'm not too worried because if I look at all of the nations that are majority non-religious, they seem to be better off, not worse off in pretty much every imaginable respect. So there doesn't seem to be any kind of negative psychological impact to leaving religion in those cultures at all. Like, I remember one of the most ridiculous examples is that I think it's in Sweden. I don't remember. One of the nations where Breivik something, the mass murderer, like worst mass murderer of all time, killed 400 people or something. He's in a prison there's a prison there that where the mass murderers go. They're on an island with no guards, no fence, and there's a maximum prison sentence of I think 20 years, and then they're let free. So the societies are very different in the secular countries, but they seem to be better off psychologically than everywhere else. I don't see the negative side effects that Nietzsche and other proponents of need God advocate for. It seems like those societies that are non-religious do better off in many cases, most cases, even.
I like it, bro. I respect it. The only thing that I would say is that I think when you look at places like China and Japan that have these giant numbers of atheists, they are the types of atheists that it's like Buddhism is atheist, right? The Buddhists don't believe in a God, but they are also sympathetic to Hinduism, from which that ideology comes from, which says that there is a pantheon of gods that have more of a practical purpose than an objective reality like the Abrahamic God. And so I think you might be hard pressed to convince me that these are atheist countries in the traditional sense, but I'm glad that you're not worried about traditional terms.
Well,
But
I'm like
your
use of traditional here seems to be like cherry picking. Like I could say that traditional Christianity is the Christianity taught in Zimbabwe or something. Obviously, that's not the case. Like traditional Christianity teaches that having sex with virgins eliminates AIDS. Like clearly, it doesn't. That's ridiculous. But there's a minority of people who do adopt Christianity who have these ridiculous beliefs, and I think that's the same with China and Russia. Japan's better off in a lot of ways, but like North Korea, China, and Russia are the bad atheist countries. Yes, they're atheist countries, and they have lots of bad social things, but there are also lots of very bad Christian countries and very, very bad Muslim countries. And so I think really what we should be looking at is more like the average. What is the average of each of these places? What has the best average? Because obviously any ideology is going to have some people who has a very positive impact on, and some people who it has a very negative impact on. And so when we're trying to select what is the best ideology, we want one that produces the most people who it has the positive impact on and the least people who it has the negative impact on. And secular ideologies seem to provide that. So it seems, even though there are definitely bad cases of secular ideology, and secular ideologies do have a negative impact on many people who stop believing, overall it seems like their impact is more positive than negative.
So you know what? I was actually wrong with my estimation then about how many atheists are in the world. The number is a lot larger when you take into account all of the religious groups that are religions without a God.
Yeah, like the polls in America, it's like 25% are non-religious. UK, it's 52% are non-religious. So yeah, it's a very big number.
I think maybe the reason the numbers are so skewed is because certain people are assuming that to be an atheist, you don't believe in the supernatural at all. You don't believe in, you're a, evidentialist to some degree, and they're maybe taking the name to mean something that it doesn't necessarily have to. You hear that?
Yes.
Oh shoot.
All right.
My YouTube just opened.
That's hilarious.
So okay. YouTube.
You sure it was? It was totally not your Pornhub. Definitely YouTube, not Pornhub. Yes.
No, it was definitely 100% not Pornhub.
It's like your wife's in the chat. She's like, boy.
I just had to double check that it wasn't Pornhub. But bro, like legit conversation, man. Like, I really appreciate it. I really don't have anything else to add, man, other than that was and I'm gonna formulate it in a way that makes more sense. But I think you've really kind of got where I'm coming from with it. I think that if we're gonna call ourselves humanists, and I know you haven't referred to yourself that way, but if the betterment of society is our goal, I don't think that we should look to attack things that have bountiful amounts of instrumental value, let's say.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I'd say that if, as an atheist, your goal is to destroy religion, that's a terrible goal. One, because I'd lose my job and I wouldn't have any money anymore, and that would be a greatest travesty ever. Secondly, I do think that a lot of people do get a value out of religion, and so I don't think the goal should be to take that away from them. It should be more, if they're open to having conversations, just having friendly conversations, but never to take religion away from people, because it does provide value. It has given people a lot of comfort and societal benefits, and so it should always be wrong to forcibly try to take that away, because I agree with you that it should be wrong to attack things that do provide a benefit to many people.
Absolutely, for sure. Bro, I've appreciated this conversation. I hope you have me on again. Hope I didn't annoy you too much. And just to be clear, I still agree with all of the traditional arguments. I agree with the the Kalam cosmological and the ontological. All that stuff is great. I just wanted to get your perspective on this kind of pragmatic way of thinking. So I appreciate you allowing me on.
Yeah, absolutely. We should chat some more about those other arguments and see what your thoughts are on those.
Come on Clubhouse more. Like, I don't see you on Clubhouse that often.
Yeah, it's because it's harder to stream on Clubhouse. I can't get my camera to work, and I have to use like the thing there. Right. It's not as fun. And Discord.
So I'm gonna be in your DMs on Twitter, bro. Like, to set up another one of these, because
absolutely. Come to my Discord.
I definitely want to prove you wrong and see you get baptized. So,
hey, if you pay me enough money, I will do it.
Bro, one more thing. You just reminded me of something else. Rupert Sheldrake. You know who Rupert Sheldrake is?
Yes, I do know what Rupert Sheldrake, and I have read his very silly papers on the panpsychism stuff.
We're not doing that. No, so Rupert Sheldrake, he talks about this study where atheists refuse to sell their souls. Like, they claim to not believe in souls, and there was like a contract that said, I will sell my soul to this person for $50, and you have to sign your name on the contract and turn it in. And atheists would not sign their name on this paper.
Yep, that's the same. Anthropocentric fallacy of hyperactive agency detection. It's the exact same as the ghost under the bed. It's like, if you ask someone to go into a haunted house, most people will say no, because it's a haunted house. Like, there's no ghosts, but even if they don't believe in ghosts, it's a haunted house. They're still not going to go in. The same thing applies to like death. Because it's an area that's like an unknown, like under the bed or in the closet, something you can't see. Because of our hyperactive agency detection system, we're designed to be afraid of the unknown, which is why they won't sell their souls, because it's the unknown. Just like why you won't go into a haunted house, or why you don't want to open the door after you've watched the horror movie. It's the same kind of a thing.
For sure. All right, man. I'm gonna get back to work. I appreciate you, bro. I'm gonna be on again, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks
Keep
for coming
doing
on.
what you're doing. Keep questioning.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it. And I will see you later.
Respect, bro.
All right, guys, let's go to the after show on the Discords. The Discords. Link is at the very bottom of the screen. Why is Discord not Discording? We have identified the underlying issue with the API outage, but are dealing with secondary issues on one of our database clusters. We have our entire on-call response team online responding to what the balls? The balls? Looks like Discord's broken. Can't do an after show if the Discord's broken. That sucks. That sucks. Meet Tom and Mystic Jump after this conversation in the Discord, which is currently broken. Made by Jim Bob. Super chat. Truth is presupposed before a fact is established. I don't know what that means. Where's freaking Nirvana? Amatic, fix the Discord. Scotty, at Scotty, fix the Discord. YouTube. Well, if Discord's broken, can't really do anything. Damn it. Damn. All right, guys. No after show because freaking Discord's broken. So, all right. I'm going to come back tonight at 6 in 4 hours for... I got Hake. The Legend of Hake. To come on, we're going to talk about the existence of God, evidence of God, that kind of stuff. So I'll see you guys in 4 hours. Peace out.